Sarah is a registered psychotherapist and certified music therapist based in Kitchener, Ontario. She worked for close to a decade as a music therapist in a hospital and now focuses on a private practice and research in the Faculty of Social Work at Wilfrid Laurier University. She has researched and published on the use of music in healthcare. Thank you, Sarah, for being here with me today.
Thank you. It's great to be here today. Thanks for having me.
So we know music is therapeutic and it has a huge role in many different domains, but I'm interested to know, based on your research and your experience, if you can talk to us a little bit about its role in really like healthcare and medicine.
Yeah. I'll start by saying, I think you don't need to be a certified music therapist to use music in healthcare. I feel really strongly about that. I think music is a human right. It's a very human thing, and we all have access to it. And I think with some kind of personal exploration of what your relationship to music is, I think anyone, regardless of their formal music training, can use music in a medicalized setting. That said, where I have seen, I think the most kind of profound impact of music in a hospital setting has been being able to just really click into a person-centered way of being with patients and families very quickly. When we are institutionalized in a hospital, be it as a professional or as a patient, I know I personally have experienced both sides of that. We, like with any kind of institutionalization, we do what we need to do to survive. And as much as medicine is really striving to change, it remains a very, medicalized, very positivist space where we need to treat the body like a problem that needs to be solved. And, there's funding behind it. We need to get people through. There's just a whole culture around it. Whereas when we introduce music, even if it's really just like sitting next to the bedside and singing a song, really not rocket science, very rapidly you see you see new dimensions of people coming out. You see tears, you see laughter, you see, there's been countless times, particularly when I was working on an oncology unit with a lot of palliative patients as well, I would often just host kind of jams in the kind of community hangout, just singing songs in the family room. And, it wouldn't happen every time, but there would usually be a moment where you have the doctor wandering in, singing along with the patient that they've been treating for years. And, it's moments like that just, they don't necessarily solve life's problems, but they give us a certain connection to ourselves, our spirituality, our whole person, our resilience, and our relationships, our communities. I will just say briefly, my work in hospital was focused primarily for many years working in palliative and inpatient oncology, some outpatient oncology as well. But then in the last while that I was in hospital, it was working in inpatient mental health. And that is a whole other world where, you have folks really trying to thrive and survive in a highly institutionalized setting. And honestly, particularly once the pandemic started, a lot of how I would just work would be show up with a guitar, let's just sing some Oasis, sing some Backstreet Boys and see what happens. And it's doesn't have to be rocket science. So that's my kind of medium length answer about the role of music in medicine.
Yeah, it's interesting to know, just putting it into reference ourselves. When we're in a certain mood, we turn on a playlist. If I'm sad, I'm going to turn on Adele. It changes everything. So I think it just goes to show why didn't we think of this, as you said, very simple solution that can create a whole different environment for these patients, or just anybody, for us, for everybody. Right. So you spoke a little bit about it, but based on your research, honestly, this is a very general question, but would you be able to kind of explain more how you found that it supported patients, whether it's through testimonies of what you've seen in your experience research?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most of the research I've done, it's mostly been qualitative research, but there's been some quantitative studies that I've been a part of. I think access to personal resiliency and connection to self. So I'm using language that's a little bit from kind of my framework of psychotherapy training, which is very humanistic, person-centered. So some of the basic principles of that is this belief that every person has like an innate capacity for wellness and to be well. And what interferes with our not being able to be well is really just the absence of the appropriate support. So given the right support, we all have the capacity to be well. What that support looks like will vary. So when I talk about access to personal resiliency, the biggest thing I've seen with music is just that engaging with music in relationship. So turning on Adele is awesome. And that is kind of your relationship with Adele and your relationship with that song or those songs, your relationship with yourself. And that's important. And when we add that extra level of doing it in relationship, either with like a therapist and a client or a group setting, there's that extra level of witnessing. And so, and experiencing not just your own contact with your own resilience, your own kind of like, oh, now I'm feeling parts of myself that I needed to feel, but also that version of you is witnessed by others. And then there's, lots of, it really depends which kind of rabbit hole of research you want to go down. But I think even more and more, there's like a huge growing body of research looking at music and neurology, like just the sort of neurologic impacts of music, particularly with degenerative conditions such as, Alzheimer's, dementia, acquired or traumatic brain injuries. And that is really, that research will draw more on like the cross hemispheric impact of music, because music is this kind of human activity that uses both hemispheres of the brain. So there's a lot of opportunity for new neural pathways. I mean, that's not an area that I've ever specialized in, and I'm just glad that other people do, because I don't think that is really the strength that I have to offer the field. And then there's a lot of research looking at just the physiological impacts of music and how music can support entrainment of breathing and pain management, how it can support in certain rehab activities like gait improvement. So it really depends which angle you want to look at. There's a lot of behavioral, physiological impacts that very prescriptive music interventions can have. I've always veered towards the kind of humanistic side. Just in my last years of working in hospital, I was part of the spiritual care team. Like and I have always sort of worked from that angle of like, we're here to support whole person care in the hospital. So I leave the more kind of behavioral research to other qualified folks. So yeah,
I think it's incredible, regardless of what angle you come from, music just has a profound impact, and like in every domain. I'm just curious to know if you're open to sharing how you got into music therapy.
Oh, yeah. Great question. Well, you're based in Montreal, right? You're at McGill. Yeah. So that's my hometown. I grew up in Montreal, grew up in NDG, lived in Outremont towards my later years there. And my whole childhood, I was involved in music and singing in choirs, PSBGM chorale, and really long story short, I found through my own life and through ups and downs, there were periods where I needed to like actually break up with music. It was like my happy place, my joyous place, and yet it was no longer a safe space, and I needed to pull away. And like throughout my teens and early 20s, there was just a lot of this push pull. And then in my at a certain point, after getting a university degree and everything, I actually went back to school to do a CEGEP program at Vanier College in music performance, which was like one of the best life decisions I ever made. But it was like, felt really hard to go back to CEGEP when I already had a degree. And this process of like coming back home, it was like this real strong commitment of like, I'm coming home to music. And in that process, there was this really strong commitment that like, I want to never have to break up with music again, but that means that I think I have to commit to the soul of music, not to the industry of it or the performance practice or like the classical standard of excellence. I need to commit to the soul of it. And so I began to kind of like lean into the possibility of music therapy, and I had to do a lot of my own therapy to make sense of this crazy bonkers relationship with music and why I needed to pull away from it and come back to it and why it was so hard. And so just over several years, it was like music therapy, music is therapy. What is this? And so blah, 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 blah. It led me to over a decade ago, moving here to Kitchener, Ontario to do a 2-year master's in music therapy. And like kind of the rest is history. I got a job right away in the hospital here, which was like just like a dream come true. I started doing research with an organization called the Room 217 Foundation, which looks at music's broad use, not just music therapy, but just music in general, its broad use in healthcare. I worked there until 2019. Now I teach at the university as an adjunct professor, and I'm a doctoral candidate in social work, researching violence in music communities. So it's all kind of been part of a wider story. And I think whenever I start to burn out from frontline work, which is just inevitable that frontline workers and healthcare professionals of all stripes do burn out, it's that soul of music I have to come back to and say, okay, like that moment of like that's always what keeps me going, keeps me coming back.
That was really nice to hear. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was cool. I think in terms of like just kind of taking this all back to healthcare, because that's kind of what I'm in, I'm going in, continuing for the rest of my life. And I completely understand the importance of music, and I can see how important it is. But how accessible is this in hospitals? Because I know it's not easy to get everywhere. And if ever it is there, I kind of hear it like maybe once for like 30 minutes on like Monday morning.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's kind of the case. I mean, in most Canadian provinces, music therapy is absolutely not something that is ministry funded. In most hospitals that have music therapy, if they have music therapy, it's almost inevitably through private donations. It's through the foundation. And so, yeah, it comes down to funding in some ways. I mean, my position, I'll just share, I left my role as a music therapist this September in order to just kind of give more time to my private practice and my doctoral research and teaching. That was a good decision for me to make, but the position continues and someone else is in that role now, and that's great. But it's always been a bit precariously funded. It's always based on donations, based on funding. I will say though that when I've had to kind of think about it, at least in Ontario, there's been such wild healthcare cuts over the last few years. And I just think healthcare in general in this country is sort of in a state of crisis. I have actually felt better knowing that my position is supported by the community rather than supported by the Ford government. Because in a sense, I almost trust my community more to figure out a way to keep it going than I do the government, you know? So, but long story short, that is why access is the way that it is. Yeah, it will usually be, and it was always a bit of a struggle for me. I had very limited hours. Usually the funding had been earmarked by a donor or like a group of donors for a particular thing, or like we want to support oncology or we want to support adult mental health. So, you know, that's not how hospitals work. Like, yes, there are absolutely siloed units, but especially when you're bringing in music. I mean, I can't tell you how many referrals I would get just by pushing a cart full of instruments through a hallway to get to another patient. And then someone stops me and is like, oh, by the way, can you go there? Can you go there? Of course I'm going to say yes. But sometimes there's a conflict there because like I'm here for a limited time. The funding says I have to spend time over there. But meanwhile, there's a need that level of precarity is really frustrating. And I think it really does limit the profession. Also, because music therapy has often been seen as a bit niche. There's a bit of a trend in the sector, or in the profession rather, to have music therapy agencies come up with contracts. But this happens a lot in long-term care. You have an agency that has a contract, and then they just send the music therapist to that person. But then you're missing that opportunity for an individual professional to have their own contract and build something more. So I think there's a lot of, maybe structural things to consider. What I felt great about, what I'm so happy about with music therapy in my hospital, Grand River Hospital, was that in the last few years, the discipline came under spiritual care. And that makes a lot of sense because spiritual care is ministry funded. It does have full-time staff. It is a team. It's a team that works in very complementary scopes and values and approaches to practice as music therapy. And so we can work together as a team. And I think that is crucial for music therapy to thrive, especially in an acute care hospital, is that there needs to be team integration, collaboration. It's not just coming in to do that 1 or 2 sessions that were referred. Like, you need to be present for rounds. You need to be present on certain committees. You need to have a presence. So yeah, that's my 2 cents about that.
That's actually really cool. Kind of making me think in terms of how is it structured at the hospitals I work in. So something I'm going to definitely keep in mind.
There's a lot. Are you at the UHN? Sorry, no, that's Toronto. You're at the McGill Teaching Hospital?
all those sites. All right. So I guess to wrap it up in terms of like advice that I'll seek from you, what can I do, or what can we do to kind of not only promote music therapy, but kind of just implement music into our care? Like, how can I go about it? Is there a certain way, or do I just say like, hey, do you want to listen to music, and kind of like play something that the patient wants to play? What would you suggest?
I mean, first of all, I love that suggestion, that idea that, why don't I just ask patients, hey, do you want me to hook you up with some music? Do you want to listen to something? I think the biggest advice I can give so you asked 2 questions. You said, how can you promote music therapy? That's a bit more complicated. I think I just talked about that a bit.
Yeah.
But how can you promote music? That's really powerful. I think doing exactly what you just said. I would say my guidance would be, start with asking yourself, like, where can me, in my role as a medical student, on a shift, where can I benefit right now from music? And that might be a vulnerable question, because it might be a bit disarming. It might kind of pull you out of I don't know how long your shifts are, like the 12-hour, just the survivalness of it, but it also might invite fun, emotional dimensions of things. I also wouldn't be afraid of going with the fun avenue. Like, I think often we think of music therapy as like serious, end of life. Like, no, it can be a chance just to get silly. So yeah, ask yourself, where can I benefit from music? Does it mean that it would be cool to like have musicians literally like playing a little show on your unit? Are there people on your team that have the skill set to actually do that themselves? Then maybe take a bit of extra time and see if you can implement that. Do you want to try singing a song while you're doing some kind of intervention? Especially if I don't know anything about you as a musician, but like, especially folks who feel insecure about their singing voices, like the same folks who will say, I'm not a good singer, they will have no problem singing to a baby. So it's like it's in us, right? So maybe dig into that. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to not be perfect. I think the beauty of bringing in music making together in hospital is because it actually is a departure from perfection. And there's so much pressure to be perfect and to follow best practices. So yeah, ask your patients, do you want to listen to music? Bring in your own music, sing songs with people, see if you can recruit folks to have like little jams or concerts in different strange places in the hospital. I've done weird concerts in weird places. Yeah, experiment, take risks, try it out.
Awesome. Honestly, this was great. This was really great. And this was very unique. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sitting here with me today.
So welcome. It was great to chat with you. Yeah.
Thank you.